The slap echoed, shattering the stillness of the first-class cabin. Everything seemed to freeze for a moment. Every eye was drawn to the middle-aged flight attendant, standing frozen. Her hands still raised, her eyes filled with terror. Evelyn Carter could not believe her own actions just now. The strangled cries of a young boy broke the silence. His chubby face was flushed from tears. He was only 4 years old, small compared to the first-class leather seat. But now he had become the center of a storm no one could have predicted. "What did you do to my son?" The man's voice was low, cold, and authoritative. He stood up abruptly from his seat, each word coming out clearly, as though he was suppressing his rage under a thin layer of ice. Evelyn instinctively took a step back, her professional smile vanishing completely. Do you know who this boy is? And do you know who I am?" she stammered. On the man's wrist, the expensive Patek Philippe watch gleamed under the light, possibly worth more than her entire annual salary. But in that moment, no one cared about money or status. The cabin erupted into chaos. Flight crew members rushed in. Passengers began pulling out their phones to record the scene. None of them knew that this impulsive moment would trigger a series of events where prejudice, misunderstandings, and seemingly unrelated connections would intertwine and expose secrets buried for decades. 12 hours earlier at San Francisco International Airport, the scene had been completely different. In the flight crew's lounge, Evelyn Carter adjusted her navy blue scarf in front of the mirror. Her hair was neatly tied up, and she had carefully hidden a few strands of gray. At 58, Evelyn still maintained her professional demeanor after 34 years with Transcontinental Airlines. Though the signs of age were evident at the corners of her eyes, her posture remained straight, her smile always ready as an essential part of her uniform. Transcon Flight 457 to New York, last call for flight attendants. The dispatcher's voice echoed through the lounge. "We're still short a first-class attendant." "Must be Chloe Grant calling in sick again," Evelyn muttered, glancing at her watch. "Third time this month." Samuel Bennett, the chief flight attendant, sighed in frustration. "The board keeps covering for her 'cause her father's on the council. Meanwhile, we show up 15 minutes early every day for 30 years, and no one ever says a word of thanks. That's life." Evelyn shrugged, grabbing her suitcase and standing up. The dispatcher hurried over. "Chloe called in sick. Evelyn, you're being moved to first class today." Evelyn's eyes lit up. First class meant fewer passengers, higher quality service, and better tips. After 3 consecutive flights in economy, her legs really needed a decent rest. Every cloud has a silver lining. She chuckled softly, straightening her posture as she headed toward the gate. Samuel walked beside her. His hair, touched with gray, was neatly trimmed. At 62, he had more years with the airline than Evelyn, and he was her closest friend in the company. They had witnessed the airline industry's glory days in the 80s and watched it turn into the practical, business-minded operation it was today. "Heard Harold Quinn is retiring next month," Samuel asked as they walked through the terminal. "After 40 years of service." Evelyn nodded. "Makes you feel sentimental. What about us when our time comes? Just for you, let's say I've got at least 5 more years in me. Retirement savings sure aren't what they used to be." Samuel laughed softly. Evelyn's expression softened. "My daughter keeps urging me to retire and take care of the grandkids. As if I haven't sacrificed enough already being a single mom flying all over the place for years." Samuel nodded sympathetically. "My son gives me grief for not being there for the important events. Now he's busier than I was back then. We barely get a weekly call." They stopped at the gate where passengers were starting to line up to board. Through the glass window, the Airbus A330 awaited on the runway, its silver wings gleaming in the early sunlight. A new day, a new opportunity, Evelyn said, adjusting her uniform. "Let's give it our best." Derek Hayes arrived at the gate just in time. holding his son. Micah's hand, he remained calm as if everything was under control. At 42, Derek exuded the confidence of someone who was always in charge. His custom-tailored suit stood out among the casual weekend attire of the other passengers. His sharp eyes, framed by modern glasses, were constantly scanning the surroundings. "Dad, I'm thirsty." Micah tugged on his father's hand, his voice small but insistent. "I'll get you some water once we're on the plane." "Son," Derek gently replied, moving through the priority line while quickly checking his phone one last time before switching it to airplane mode. 3 new emails from the Tokyo office flashed on the screen, but he ignored them. This trip wasn't about work. It was dedicated time for Micah. Something rare since his divorce 2 years ago. His work had helped him get through the tough times, and it had turned Reed Enterprises from a tech consultancy into a global empire with branches in 4 continents. But success came at a price. The time he had for his son was now limited to short vacations and alternate weekends. This trip to New York was his ex-wife Danielle's idea. "The boy needs to know you're his dad, not just the one who sends expensive gifts," she had said during their recent custody exchange. There was no longer the sharp tone of accusation she used to have, but instead a sincere concern. A soft chime rang, pulling Derek Hayes out of his thoughts. An announcement came over the speaker. "We invite first-class passengers and Platinum Elite members to board at Lane 1. Derek held Micah's hand and led him toward the ticket gate. The staff member there glanced at their boarding passes, her eyes widening slightly as if recognizing someone, but she quickly regained her professional composure. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hayes," she said with a friendly smile, then leaned down to Micah's level. "And welcome to you, too, little one. Is this your first flight?" Micah shook his head, his shyness melting away. "I've flown 17 times already. This plane is an Airbus A330-300 powered by Rolls-Royce, Trent 700 engines." The girl laughed cheerfully. "Sounds like we have a future pilot here." The kid remembers every detail, Derek explained, his eyes filled with pride. Lately he's so into aviation that he even knows the engine diagrams. As they walked down the jet bridge, a familiar sensation ran down Derek's spine. A form of invisible pressure when having to appear in public. Despite being one of the most successful black CEOs in Silicon Valley, he couldn't escape the constant scrutiny in spaces where most people were white. "Do you remember the things I told you?" he asked as they neared the plane. Micah repeated his father's instructions with childlike seriousness. "Speak softly, fasten the seatbelt, and behave politely." "That's right, son." Derek smiled gently, placing a hand on his shoulder as they walked onto the plane. There, Evelyn Carter was greeting passengers with her usual professional smile. Though it was still early, she maintained the politeness and confidence she was known for. The first-class cabin was always her favorite: fewer passengers, more refined service, and usually people who knew how to behave. "Welcome aboard seat 2A. On the right, she directed a familiar elderly man on this route. "Coffee as usual after takeoff." "Right, Mr. Whitmore." "You're an angel as always, Evelyn," he replied cheerfully, then proceeded to his seat. The first-class line continued to fill mostly successful business people, a few celebrities hiding behind sunglasses, and many retired wealthy individuals. Over her many years of flying, Evelyn had learned to read passengers, categorize them by their demeanor in order to serve them most effectively and avoid any trouble. When a tall black man in a tailored suit entered with a small boy, her eyes immediately noticed the details: the expensive watch, the confident posture, and the protective look in his eyes as he held the child's hand. The boy had big, curious eyes, eagerly looking around the luxurious space with excitement that was hard to hide. "Welcome, father and son," Evelyn said gently. "May I see your boarding passes?" Derek handed over 2 boarding passes. Evelyn took a quick glance seats 3A and 3B, the best spots in first class. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Please follow me this way," she said, leading them to their seats where Samuel Bennett was assisting passengers with their luggage. "Excuse me, is this a Boeing?" Micah looked up and asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. "No, this is an Airbus A330. Evelyn answered right away without hesitation. "You're a really knowledgeable young man. I love everything with wings," Derek laughed. Lately he's been reading all about aviation. "We always welcome aviation enthusiasts," Evelyn smiled. "Maybe after we land, you could meet the captain for a moment." Micah lit up with excitement. But just then a loud argument at the entrance made the entire cabin turn their heads. "I don't care what the system says." "I booked seats, 3A and 3B, a loud voice rang out. A middle-aged man with graying hair wearing an expensive but wrinkled suit was arguing with Samuel. "My assistant confirmed these seats for me yesterday." Evelyn quickly stepped over. "Is there a problem?" she asked quietly. "This guest insists he was assigned seats 3A and 3B, Samuel replied calmly. "But the system shows they are assigned to another passenger." Evelyn glanced over at Derek and Micah, now settled in the disputed seats. The silver-haired man followed her gaze, his face turning red with anger. "There must be some mistake," he repeated harshly. "I specifically requested those seats because they have more legroom." "Let me double-check the list," Evelyn said in a calm yet firm voice, then opened her tablet. A quick glance confirmed what she already knew. Those seats were assigned to Mr. Hayes and his son. "I'm sorry, but seats 3A and 3B are already assigned to Mr. Hayes and young Micah. However, I can offer you 4A, which also has similar legroom." The man Richard Langston, according to the passenger list, was clearly displeased. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? I've been a Diamond member for 15 years. "We truly appreciate your loyalty, sir," Evelyn replied evenly. "Seat 4A is really a great option." "The issue isn't the seat," Richard whispered pointedly, "but that you've let them take my seat." His eyes flicked toward Derek and Micah. Laden with implication, Evelyn's professional smile remained, but her eyes hardened. "Seats are confirmed at check-in, sir. Your boarding pass clearly lists seat 4A. May I assist you with your luggage?" Richard reluctantly dragged his suitcase toward his seat, muttering about calling headquarters. Evelyn and Samuel exchanged a knowing glance. They had encountered many passengers like Richard in their flying careers, those accustomed to privileges, unafraid to display attitudes, and carrying heavy prejudices in their hearts. Evelyn Carter glanced quickly at Samuel Bennett, and the two exchanged a look of mutual understanding. After decades of working together, they had encountered many passengers like Richard Langston, people who always believed they were entitled to more accustomed to privileges, and who didn't bother to hide their underlying prejudices in every word they spoke. Even though passengers were still boarding, Evelyn couldn't help but notice the Hayes father and son. There was something about little Micah that reminded her of her own grandson Noah. The boy was 6 years old, beginning to be curious about the world and passionate about everything in his own way. The thought that someone could make her grandson feel unwelcome stirred something inside her. She paused by their seats and gently asked, "Would you like anything before takeoff?" "Orange juice, water, or coffee for you?" "Sir, apple juice." Micah immediately replied, his excitement evident. "A glass of water is fine for me. And if possible, I'd like a pillow for my son Derek." Smiled, adjusting Micah's seatbelt. "It's a long flight. I'll bring it right over." Evelyn nodded her smile this time. Not just professional courtesy, but genuine warmth. She had worked with passengers from all walks of life, and to her how they treated the flight attendants was a clearer reflection of their true nature than anything they wore or their status. Derek Hayes didn't need to show any power. He was focused on taking care of his son, and that made Evelyn feel a warmth inside. As she made her way back to the service cabin to prepare drinks before takeoff, Evelyn happened to overhear Richard Langston speaking on the phone behind her. "They bump those people into the very seats I booked. Nowadays, it's all about labeling people how much of this or that group is represented. I bet they're flying with reward points. Right?" Evelyn's hands froze for a moment as she held the plastic cup. After 34 years of flying, remarks like that shouldn't affect her anymore. But something still caught in her chest. She glanced at Samuel, who was preparing a tray of bread rolls nearby. He caught her eye and gave a subtle nod as if sharing an understanding. "Just like water off a duck's back," he said quietly. That was the phrase they always used when dealing with difficult passengers. "Let it flow off," she repeated, then returned to her work with a calm exterior. But inside she had made up her mind on this flight. She would take extra care of the Hayes father and son. That was how she would respond to people like Richard Langston. As the Airbus A330 accelerated and lifted off the runway, Micah pressed his face to the window, watching San Francisco shrink beneath them. Derek observed his son, his heart swelling with emotion. He had missed so many moments like this because of work. But today, he was here. "Dad, we're flying on the clouds," Micah exclaimed, his voice loud and clear. Richard, sitting across the aisle, cleared his throat loudly behind his newspaper, as if trying to remind them of something. Derek gently placed his hand on Micah's shoulder. "Son, remember what I told you. Keep your voice down. Not everyone loves the sky like you do." Micah nodded, his legs still swinging in excitement. Derek felt that familiar pressure, the feeling of always being scrutinized, always having to ensure his son was perfect, proper, so no one would have reason to attach the prejudices already in their minds. After the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, breakfast was served. Evelyn returned with her warm smile, laid out the napkin, and set the table for the father and son. "Today, we have scrambled eggs with cheese, or Belgian waffles." "Which would you like?" "Waffles, please," Micah said quietly, remembering his father's advice. "Good choice." Evelyn winked. "And for you, sir, I'll have the eggs," Derek replied, "and a coffee, if you don't mind." "Right away." Evelyn nodded and moved on to the next row of seats. Derek suddenly realized Richard Langston's gaze was on him. Not the usual curious stare, but one of scrutiny. His eyes flicked to the expensive watch on Derek's wrist, then to the tailored suit before narrowing, as if trying to figure out whether Derek was some kind of athlete or actor. Derek was used to this. He knew that look, the questioning gaze. "What's someone like you doing in this cabin?" No one ever considered that he could be a tech CEO, someone who had built his career from nothing. To deal with it, Derek had trained himself, always dress impeccably, speak properly, act confidently, but not arrogantly. But maintaining that image was exhausting. The bigger concern was Micah one day. The boy would feel it. The innocent excitement of today would eventually be dulled by the harsh realities. Just thinking about his son having to hold himself back for others' sake made Derek's heart tighten. "Dad, can I watch my iPad now?" Micah asked after finishing his meal, his cheek covered with a bit of syrup. "Wash your hands first." Derek handed him a napkin. "I've downloaded a few documentaries about airplanes." "Is there one about jumbo jets?" Micah asked, his eyes wide. "Just that one." Derek smiled, pulling the iPad from his briefcase. As Micah intently focused on the screen, Derek opened his laptop, intending to review his presentation for the upcoming meetings in New York, but his mind wandered back to his son. This trip was supposed to be about getting closer to him, yet the schedule had been interrupted by 3 important meetings in Manhattan. Danielle's words. Derek Hayes' ex-wife still echoed somewhere in his mind. "The boy needs to know he's more important than your mergers." She wasn't wrong. After the divorce, Derek threw himself into work as a way to forget his failed marriage, and also because he always used success as a balm to soothe his wounds. His phone vibrated softly. A message from his assistant at the Tokyo office. Urgent call about the Nakamura acquisition. Can you connect within the next 2 hours? Derek sighed and glanced at Micah, who was engrossed in a Boeing 747 documentary, as if nothing could interrupt his focus. A quick call should be fine, he thought. He could use the satellite phone in the small work area behind the first-class cabin. While Micah stayed engrossed in his favorite program, he caught Evelyn Carter's eye as she walked by. "Sorry, I need to make a quick work call. Is there somewhere quiet I could go?" he asked. "Of course," Sir Evelyn replied politely. "There's a small work area behind the galley. If you'd like, I can keep an eye on your grandson." Derek hesitated. Leaving Micah alone wasn't something he usually did. But the Nakamura deal had been in the works for months and could bring in millions of dollars. "Thank you. I won't be long. Micah has his program on, so he'll be fine." He leaned down to his son. "Son, I need to make a call for a bit. Stay here and keep watching your movie. I'll be right behind the curtain. Evelyn will be close by, so if you need anything, you can call her." "Okay." Micah didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Okay, Dad." Derek gave his son one last glance and left his seat phone in hand. "Just 15 minutes, he told himself. What could possibly happen in 15 minutes? Evelyn continued her work as usual, collecting breakfast trays and refilling coffee for passengers. Everything in the cabin was running smoothly, except for Richard Langston, who kept pressing the call button. For trivial reasons, clearly just to prove he was an important person. She was used to passengers like that. She maintained her professional smile, but in her mind she was counting down the minutes until landing. As she walked past row 3, Evelyn noticed Micah sitting by himself, absorbed in his tablet. Derek had said he'd step away for a while, and although the first-class cabin was usually quiet, Evelyn still made a mental note. Children shouldn't be left alone on a plane, even if just for a few minutes. She was arranging drinks in the galley when she heard raised voices coming from the front. A child's excited voice mixed with a gruff man's sharp tone. She hurried out to the cabin. Micah had left his seat and was standing next to Richard's, pointing at the screen of his laptop. "I just wanted to say the information is wrong. The 777X doesn't use GE90 engines. It uses GE9X with a different fan ratio." Micah said. Richard whipped around his face, turning red. "Stay away from my laptop." "Where's your dad?" "Kids shouldn't be roaming around, touching other people's things." "I didn't touch it." Micah stammered, his face growing more confused as he was scolded. "I just saw the article was wrong and wanted to correct it." "I don't need help from a disrespectful child," Richard snapped. Then he looked around, frustrated. "Flight attendant, please take this child away. Some of us are trying to work here." Evelyn walked up, her heart sinking. "Micah, sweetie, let's go back to your seat. Your dad will be back soon." "But I just..." "Come on, dear Evelyn," said gently but firmly, guiding him back to his seat. She turned back to Richard. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir. That child needs to be taught manners," Richard said loudly enough for others to hear. "This is not a daycare." Evelyn gently squeezed Micah's hand as she saw his shoulders slump. She remembered her daughter Emily, who had suffered from the same cold, critical comments. Children should be nurtured in their passions, not crushed by prejudices. "Your knowledge about airplanes is impressive," she said softly, as she helped Micah back to his seat. "But remember, we need to stay seated while the plane is flying, okay?" Micah nodded. The man's laptop showed the 777X, but it said it uses GE90 engines. "Which is wrong. I just wanted to fix it. You did that because you wanted to help. But next time, tell your dad first." "Okay." Some grown-ups get startled when someone approaches them unexpectedly. "Okay," Micah replied, climbing back into his seat. "Where's Dad?" "He's on the phone. He'll be back soon. Do you want some apple juice?" Micah nodded, his eyes once again glued to the tablet screen. Evelyn let out a quiet sigh of relief. The situation had been resolved, but Richard's reaction still left her unsettled. In her experience, most passengers would smile or politely decline when a child shared their passion. But Richard was different. He reacted with unnecessary anger. As she returned to the galley to get the apple juice, the call button sounded again. Evelyn glanced at the indicator board. No surprise. It was again for seat 4O. Richard Langston's demands grew increasingly unreasonable. He had already changed his drink twice, complained about the cabin temperature, the Wi-Fi speed, and now it was about a child being in first class. Yes, Mr. Langston. How can I assist you? Evelyn Carter approached with a calmness that bordered on impassivity. That child should not be left unattended like that, Richard said loudly, causing some passengers to glance over. He practically climbed into my seat. Where's his father? This is so unprofessional. Mr. Hayes is on an important call behind the cabin. I've already spoken with young Micah, and he understands that he needs to remain seated. Evelyn replied in a calm tone. Richard muttered, If they can't look after their child, they should be moved to economy. Evelyn maintained her professional smile, though the corners of her mouth tightened slightly. I understand, sir. Everything has been handled. Is there anything else you need? Richard waved his hand dismissively as if to shoo her away. Evelyn turned and walked back to the galley, silently reminding herself that she had faced worse situations than this. However, her heart was still uneasy. Richard's displeased look toward Micah made her worried. Her instincts told her to keep a closer eye on the boy. Just a few minutes later, that feeling turned into reality. A loud yell rang out from row 4. Richard had almost risen from his seat, his face flushed with anger. Enough, manage your son, or I'll have him removed from this cabin. Evelyn rushed over and saw Micah standing right beside Richard, holding a pair of expensive noise-canceling headphones. The boy looked up at Evelyn, his eyes searching for help. I just wanted to see if they were Bose or Sony headphones. I wasn't going to break them, Micah said, confused. Richard yanked the headphones out of Micah's hands. Thief, where's your father? This is unacceptable. A few passengers turned to watch, sensing the tension rising in the air. Evelyn stepped between the two, blocking Richard's accusing glare. Her voice was low, but clear. Mr. Langston, please remain calm. Micah, sweetie, those headphones don't belong to you, so you shouldn't be touching them. Let's go back to your seat now, okay? She reached for the boy's hand to lead him away, but Richard wouldn't stop. It's because of things like this that kids today are hopeless, he almost shouted. No discipline, no manners. In my day, children knew their place. Micah gripped Evelyn's hand tighter, and she could feel the fear rising in him. Inside something inside, Evelyn snapped. She turned back, her gaze stern. Mr. Langston, I've handled this. Micah will return to his seat, and his father will be notified. No more comments, please, Richard. Scowled, his voice sharp. Don't tell me what I need, stewardess. I will file a formal complaint about this service. The word stewardess was deliberately emphasized, not flight attendant, the modern term, but stewardess laden with condescension. Evelyn had heard worse words in her 3 decades of flying, but this time it was different. This time, a child was also being hurt. Before she could respond, Micah suddenly pulled his hand from hers and turned to face Richard, his childlike voice ringing out in the stunned silence of the cabin. Don't call her that. She's a flight attendant, not a stewardess, and you shouldn't talk like that. My dad says people who talk bad have pain inside them. Richard jumped, raising his hand, as if to stop the boy or to prevent him from touching something. But the gesture was too sudden. His hand accidentally slapped Micah's shoulder, causing the boy to stumble back, losing his balance and nearly falling. The incident happened in the blink of an eye. Evelyn saw the boy wobble, heard the gasp of the passengers around her, and then before her mind could catch up, her hand was raised. The slap she gave Richard echoed like thunder in the still cabin. The sound shattered the air. Richard put his hand to his cheek, eyes wide in shock. Evelyn stood still, frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. Micah began to cry. Not the usual demand for comfort, but the sobs of a child who couldn't understand why adults acted this way. Before anyone could react, a deep voice called from the back of the cabin. "What the hell is going on here? What happened to my son, Derek?" Hayes had just stepped out from the work area, his phone still in his hand. His expression changed rapidly, first concern, then anger, then disbelief, as he saw the scene: his son crying, Richard clutching his cheek, and Evelyn standing there with her hands still trembling. In that moment, 9,000 meters above the United States, three people who were once strangers were caught in an inevitable whirlpool. The incident would soon spread across social media company, meeting rooms, and family living rooms. But the real story, the story of prejudice, empathy, and choice, was just beginning. But the truth behind all the glances, the prejudices, the misunderstandings, and the chance for redemption was just beginning to reveal itself. Derek Hayes quickly scooped Micah into his arms carefully, checking to make sure his son wasn't hurt. Thankfully, aside from the tears and the look of shock on his face, the boy was unharmed. Once he was certain, Derek looked up, his voice controlled but steely. "I want to know exactly what happened. Right now." Richard Langston regained his composure first, although his anger still overshadowed his initial confusion. "Your son has been running all over while you've been absent," he said, pointing toward Evelyn. "He took it upon himself to touch my personal belongings. And this person who should have been in control slapped me. That's not true." Micah choked out. "He pushed me. He also called Ms. Evelyn bad names." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice calm, despite her rapidly beating heart. "Sir, perhaps we should discuss this privately. This was just a misunderstanding that got out of hand." "A misunderstanding?" Richard interrupted, his face turning bright red. "You assaulted a passenger. I'm going to sue you to the fullest extent." He turned to Derek, pointing at him angrily. "And you should teach your child some manners before bringing him into places meant for adults." Derek looked Richard directly in the eyes, his gaze sharp, but his voice remained steady. "My son only left his seat for a few minutes. Does that justify you laying your hands on a 4-year-old? By now, Samuel Bennett had arrived, alerted by passengers. "What's going on? We need to inform the captain." "Immediately," Evelyn whispered, never taking her eyes off Richard. Samuel immediately turned to relay the message. Inside the cabin, the quiet that had once prevailed was now replaced with phones, held high cameras, recording in passengers' focused gazes. Derek could feel the shift. A private situation was quickly becoming a public spectacle. A chill ran down his spine. He had been through this before. How the private lives of black people were easily exaggerated, distorted, and judged online, where just a few seconds of video could condemn someone's entire life. "Dad, I just wanted to tell him that the airplane information was wrong," Micah said quietly in his father's arms. "I didn't mean to make anyone mad." "You didn't do anything wrong, son." Derek hugged him tighter. He looked back at Richard. "But it seems some people need to relearn the concept of boundaries, especially when it comes to not touching other people's children." Richard's face turned even redder. "The boy, he was about to touch my headphones again. I was just protecting my property. From a child who's passionate about aviation." Derek said, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "How dangerous," Evelyn intervened, taking control once more. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Langston, please return to your seats. The captain has been informed and will handle the situation. We shouldn't escalate things further." Derek nodded lightly and returned to his seat with Micah. Richard remained standing until Evelyn looked him straight in the eye. Finally, he begrudgingly sat down, muttering something about lawyers and service quality. Order was somewhat restored. Evelyn retreated to the back where Samuel was waiting. The captain wants details. What happened, Evelyn? In all my years working, I've never seen you like this. Evelyn's hand still trembled as she picked up the phone to contact the captain. He pushed the child Sam. After an entire flight of subtle discriminatory remarks, I couldn't hold back. I slapped him. We don't know the outcome yet. Samuel tried to reassure her, though his face was filled with concern. There are witnesses. He was wrong first. I was wrong too, Evelyn said, looking at her hand as though it wasn't even hers anymore. 34 years of service could end in just a few seconds of losing control. As she waited for the captain to pick up, her mind wasn't on her career, which was now on the line, but on Micah's tear-streaked face. No matter what the outcome was, Evelyn couldn't regret standing up for the boy. In seat 3A. Derek was still whispering comfort to his son, but his mind raced through the possible outcomes. As a successful black man, Derek always understood one harsh truth. A single moment could twist a situation in an unfavorable way. And now his 4-year-old son had been thrust into that world far too early. Am I going to get in trouble? Dad Micah asked softly, still looking confused. No, son. Derek replied, his voice as gentle as a breeze. But I need you to tell me everything, exactly as it happened when I wasn't around. Micah faithfully recounted everything, the incorrect article about the airplane, how he just meant to correct it, and then how he was curious about whether the headphones were like his dad's. I just wanted to see if they had noise cancellation like yours. I didn't take them. I didn't steal anything. Derek listened to every word, his heart heavy. Indeed, Micah shouldn't have left his seat or touched someone else's belongings. But every action came from innocent passion, not from a lack of manners or intentionality. The issue was, Richard's reaction wasn't a simple reminder. It was steeped in a layer of prejudice and animosity. He was considering his next steps when the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sullivan. We have been notified about an incident in the first-class cabin. For the safety and comfort of all passengers, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts until further notice. The captain's voice rang out in the cabin, firm like a verdict. We will be diverting to Denver International Airport. There the authorities will take over and handle the situation. A groan of disappointment rippled through the cabin, like a chain reaction. Derek Hayes closed his eyes for a few seconds, realizing that the situation was now beyond his control. A diversion meant police possible charges, and definitely the media would get involved, especially if someone had recorded the incident. His phone buzzed continuously, messages, notifications, calls. Everything came flooding in at once. Rumors had already started spreading. Across the aisle. Richard Langston was still complaining, his voice full of drama. This is outrageous. I'm the victim here, and now I'm being inconvenienced by a flight attendant who's lost control and an undisciplined child. A few nearby passengers turned to look at him with disapproving glances. An elderly woman from seat 2B turned fully around, her voice firm. Son, if you hadn't acted badly toward a child and a woman who was just doing her job, we would have been in New York on time. Richard was silenced. His face turned beet red with embarrassment, and then he fell silent under the heavy silence from those around him. Derek glanced at his phone again. His head of operations was calling. He knew well, once something like this hit the internet, the crisis management team would have to step in. The company's reputation, the CEO's image, the media, everything would be weighed and judged. But when he saw Micah looking up at him, his eyes full of worry, Derek made a quick decision. Work could wait. His son could not. He put his phone away and pulled Micah into his arms. "Everything will be okay, son. I promise." From the other side, Richard scoffed. Famous last words. Derek ignored him in this moment. His only priority was making Micah feel safe, no matter what would happen once they landed. This flight meant to be a father-son journey. To reconnect had turned into an unexpected turning point, pulling them into consequences that would follow them long after they stepped off this plane. Evelyn Carter sat quietly in the crew seat. In her mind was the image of the slap she had just delivered, the sound of it like thunder, the sensation of her palm still stinging. In 34 years of flying, she had faced drunk passengers, panic attacks, even small fires in the restroom, but she had never lost her composure until today. The reason was simple. Richard's cold gaze when he shoved Micah the way he ignored the boy, as if his grandson wasn't worth a second glance, that ignited her protective instincts surpassing her professional ones. Samuel Bennett brought her a glass of water and sat beside her. "The captain is talking to ground control. When we land, there will be police on the plane." Evelyn nodded, her voice distant. "Am I going to be arrested?" Samuel didn't answer right away. His eyes betrayed his worry. "The passengers are witnesses." He touched the child first. "That changes things. But you know, as crew members, we're always held to a higher standard." Evelyn sighed. "The airline's policy doesn't forgive any violent action against passengers." No matter who was wrong first, Samuel didn't argue. Both of them had been in the business long enough to understand the company would do everything it could to protect its image. And social media only needed one frame to turn everything into a disaster. Evelyn could already imagine the headline: "Flight attendant slaps first-class passenger." Samuel looked at her quietly, asking, "Why did you do it?" Evelyn looked into the small mirror in the galley. "I didn't see Richard. I saw Noah, her grandson, only a year older than Micah. When he shoved Micah in that moment, I saw Noah, and I couldn't let it go." She paused, then continued, "No one has the right to treat a child like that, especially because of prejudice." Samuel nodded, his voice soft. "We all know what really bothered him about the Hayes family." Evelyn closed her eyes, memories flooding back the countless times passengers looked at her or her colleagues with judgmental eyes. The subtle actions that outsiders didn't notice, but left deep cuts. Only 3 months until retirement, and now my pension could be gone with the wind. Samuel placed his hand on her shoulder. "One step at a time. Let me check on the passengers. You stay here until the captain calls." When she was alone, Evelyn opened her phone. She looked at pictures of her daughter Emily, her husband James, and her grandson Noah. The little boy, 6 years old, also asked questions about airplanes, trains, or why the sky was blue. If it had been Noah who had been pushed, would Evelyn have reacted differently? No, not for a second, but personal feelings couldn't replace professional standards, and Evelyn knew she had crossed that line. The sound of the engines changing made her realize the plane was descending, preparing to land in Denver. Outside the window, the sky was slowly turning gray. No matter what awaited her down there, a termination letter, a legal file, or the scrutinizing gazes of the public, Evelyn felt an unusual calm. Her entire career, her reputation could be on the line. But in her mind, only one thing echoed. What my dad says. People with harsh words are that way, because they're sad inside. From the mouth of a child came a lesson that many adults had forgotten. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted. What had started as an argument was now almost like a silent division. Many passengers, after witnessing everything, began to empathize with Derek and Micah. They no longer avoided eye contact, but looked at Richard with clear disapproval. As some passengers quietly buried their heads in books or pretended to focus on their screens to avoid getting involved, Richard Langston became unusually quiet. He occasionally reached up to gently touch his cheek, the spot where Evelyn Carter's slap still stung. Before the captain asked all passengers to turn off their electronic devices in preparation for landing, Richard had made several urgent calls mentioning assault and unacceptable service. On the other side of the cabin, Derek Hayes used the remaining time to explain to Micah what was happening using simple words that a child could understand. "The plane has to land because there's been a little trouble," he said slowly. "Some grown-ups have been arguing." "Because of me?" Micah asked, the excitement from the flight now replaced by a sad expression. "It's not your fault," Derek reassured him. "The adults choose how they act. You did nothing wrong." He knew that the memory of today might become an unforgettable milestone for his son, a first encounter with a world that might not be fair to people who looked like them, a world where their presence might be questioned. Although this wasn't the lesson he intended to teach his son on this trip, perhaps Micah needed to understand this truth, though it was far too early. Derek's phone buzzed again as the plane descended below 10,000 feet. He checked quickly and saw a flood of notifications. The news had already started to spread. The first reports were one-sided. Flight attendant attacks passenger defending himself from a mischievous child. His media team had been trying to reach him, repeatedly informing him that the viral video only showed Evelyn slapping Richard without any context of what led up to it. Derek turned off his phone. The story was being shaped without the full truth. But right now, his priority wasn't the company's image. It was his son's emotions. The plane touched down in tense silence. Through the window, Derek saw the elderly woman from seat 2B had moved and was now sitting with another passenger. They were whispering, comparing stories, sharing what they had witnessed firsthand. Other small groups were starting to gather, speaking in low tones. A public trial had begun at 30,000 feet. The captain's voice came over the intercom once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed at Denver International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Authorities will board the plane to speak with some passengers involved in the recent incident. We apologize for the inconvenience and will provide an update soon regarding the New York journey." When the plane reached the gate, Samuel Bennett appeared in the first-class cabin. "Mr. Langston, Mr. Hayes, and Ms. Carter, please disembark first to speak with the airport police. Other passengers, please remain seated until further notice." Richard immediately protested, his voice sharp. "This is absurd. I'm the victim, yet I'm the one being asked to leave first, while that woman and that undisciplined child are the source of the problem." Samuel interrupted him, his tone firm. "Sir, this is not negotiable. The police will decide what happens next." Hearing the word police, Micah clutched at his father's suit jacket. Derek hugged him close, his voice soft. "It's okay, son. We just need to tell the truth, like you always do." When the door opened, revealing the jet bridge leading to the reception area, 2 uniformed officers were waiting. Derek felt an unusual calm settle inside him. Throughout his career, he had faced many prejudices that threatened his reputation, and each time he had used his poise and reasoning to overcome them. This time would be no different. He lifted Micah up, looked into his son's eyes, and whispered, "Do you remember what I've taught you? Always hold your head high, tell the truth, and believe in justice." Micah nodded, his gaze serious, like that of an adult. The 2 of them stepped off the plane, followed by Richard and then Evelyn. 4 people, once strangers, now bound by a single moment, and soon they would discover how much more their fates were intertwined than they ever imagined. In the Denver Airport Administrative Office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The main figures were separated into different rooms to give statements, while the remaining passengers were kept on the plane. In a small meeting room, Derek sat next to Micah, who was coloring with the markers provided by a kind airport employee. Across the table, Sergeant Karen Williams was reviewing her notes. "Mr. Hayes, Can you confirm that at the time of the incident, you were making a call in the business area behind the first-class cabin? Correct, yes. I left Micah to watch the document on the iPad. I was gone for about 15 minutes. During that time, your son left his seat twice to approach Mr. Langston. Derek nodded, staying calm. Wants to share information about the airplane. The second time was out of curiosity about the headphones. I reminded him that such behavior shouldn't happen, but nothing in that justifies an adult touching a child. Sergeant Williams carefully noted down his words. We have conflicting statements. Mr. Langston claims he was simply reacting and accidentally touched the child. When he approached too suddenly, Evelyn Carter confirmed that she had witnessed Richard Langston shove Micah Derek Hayes, also pointed out that many passengers had seen the incident, and several had managed to record it on their phones. We're gathering that evidence, Sergeant Karen Williams confirmed. After a brief pause, she added, Mr. Hayes, with your position and influence, I think you should know that this incident has already caught the attention of the media. Derek nodded, unsurprised. As one of the few black executives in the tech industry in Silicon Valley, he understood well that anything related to him was often exaggerated. I know, but my biggest concern right now is my son. And Ms. Carter, she's the only one who stood up for him when everyone else stayed silent. Karen looked at him thoughtfully. Are you not planning to file charges against Mr. Langston for touching your son? I want all the facts before making a decision. Derek answered calmly. What I care about most is making sure Micah isn't hurt any further. Sergeant Williams nodded, then turned to Micah. Can you tell me what happened on the plane today? In your own words. Micah turned to look at his dad. Derek smiled encouragingly. The boy nodded lightly. I saw the man's computer had a picture of an airplane, but the writing was wrong. I just wanted to help fix it. Then I saw his headphones and I wanted to check them out. He pushed me. I was scared. Then Ms. Evelyn slapped him and people started yelling. Did you touch his things without asking? The sergeant asked gently. Micah lowered his head, nodding slightly. Yes. My dad teaches me to ask before touching other people's things. Exactly, she smiled. But grown-ups shouldn't push children. Thank you for being honest. As she finished taking notes, Derek's phone buzzed again. A message from his assistant. The video has gone viral. The media is requesting an official statement. The board is in an emergency meeting. Urgent response needed. The media machine was already in full swing, concerned more about stock prices and corporate image than the truth. Derek turned off his phone. So what do we need to do now? Derek asked. We will continue gathering statements from the passengers. This isn't a simple case. Ms. Carter has admitted to slapping Mr. Langston, which according to regulations is considered an assault. However, the context will be taken into consideration. The fact that Mr. Langston touched your son complicates things further. Derek thought quietly about the unfinished trip to New York. The airline is arranging a new crew. There will be a delay of a few hours, but the flight will continue today. You'll need to decide whether to continue the journey or return to San Francisco. When the sergeant left, Derek quietly sat next to Micah. This trip had been planned as a special father-son outing, visiting museums, seeing a Broadway play, eating pizza at the place Derek had loved when he was a child. To give up now would be to teach his son that running away was the way to face adversity. Son, do you still want to go to New York? Derek asked. Micah looked up from his coloring book. Is Ms. Evelyn in trouble because of me? The question made Derek's heart tighten. A 4-year-old child was already worrying about the consequences of what adults had done. No, son. Whatever happens with Ms. Evelyn, that's because the grown-ups made choices. It's not your fault. He spoke badly about her, Micah said softly. He tried to call her by the wrong name. Derek took note of this. It was an important piece of the puzzle that explained Evelyn's unexpected reaction. So now do you want to continue or go home? Micah thought for a moment. Are we still going to the airplane museum? The aerospace museum. Of course we are. Then I want to go. And I want Ms. Evelyn to be okay. Derek smiled, proud of his son's kindness. We'll do everything we can, son. In another room, Evelyn Carter sat alone, her hands clasped tightly on her lap, waiting for what was to come. She had given a full account, not denying that she had slapped Richard Langston after witnessing him push Micah. The door opened. Captain James Sullivan walked in, still in his uniform, his face serious. Evelyn. He spoke sitting down across from her. I've spoken with the police and the company's leadership. Evelyn nodded, bracing herself. I understand the gravity of what happened. Captain, I take full responsibility. James looked at her for a long time. 34 years of work without a blemish. One of the most loved flight attendants by passengers. Always rated highly. And then, this? I don't have an excuse. Evelyn answered quietly. I reacted instinctively when I saw him push the child. But that doesn't justify assaulting a passenger. Evelyn Carter's eyes were fixed on the floor as Captain James Sullivan spoke with calm authority. The company policy is very clear, Evelyn. Any violent behavior toward passengers leads to termination, no matter the reason. She felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to remain composed. I understand. James leaned forward, his gaze steady. However, several passengers have confirmed that Mr. Richard Langston made contact with the child first. Some even sent video footage that captures the entire incident, not just the moment you slapped him. And your exemplary work record, at least to me, is something to consider. A glimmer of hope flickered within Evelyn, but she didn't dare expect too much. Are you implying something? Captain? I can't change the company policy, but I'll emphasize the special circumstances in my report. You didn't just lash out. You protected a child who was being mistreated. After that adult repeatedly displayed inappropriate behavior throughout the flight. Evelyn tried to hold back the tears, but her eyes were already stinging. Thank you. But I understand how these things work. On social media, context doesn't matter. Company policy doesn't either. Maybe James nodded. But there's one more thing you should know. The Hayes family isn't just any ordinary passenger. Derek Hayes is the CEO of Hayes Technologies, a global tech giant. His opinion on this matter will carry a lot of weight. Evelyn furrowed her brow. I didn't know who he was when this happened. I don't care about his status. I understand. But the company does. And from what I've heard, Mr. Hayes has no intention of suing Mr. Langston over what happened to his son. That will make it hard for Mr. Langston to take this legal without facing a counterattack. Before Evelyn could process the information, Sergeant Karen Williams entered the room, her eyes sweeping over both of them. Ms. Carter, Mr. Langston has officially filed a complaint against you for assault. However, he is also being investigated for actions that may constitute a crime with a child. Evelyn nodded, not avoiding the implication. I understand. Now everything depends on the prosecutor. Because of the conflicting testimonies and the complexity of the situation, the prosecutor's office will review all the evidence to decide whether or not to file charges. In the meantime, you are allowed to leave, but please remain in contact for further investigation. When the sergeant left, James stood up. The company is sending a new crew. You'll be on administrative leave while the investigation continues. Administrative leave? Evelyn repeated the euphemistic way of saying suspension. For her, it felt like the first step toward the end of her career. I'll be on the next flight back to San Francisco, right? That's right. And I sincerely apologize, Evelyn. After all, to many in the company, you did what anyone with a conscience would do when witnessing a child being treated unfairly. Evelyn nodded gratefully, then sat alone in the room. A single moment of losing control had possibly ended a career she had built for 34 years. But even if she were fired, she didn't feel regret. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of Micah being shoved back, the bewildered look on his face when the adult world responded with such cruelty. Her phone rang, a message from her daughter, "Mom, are you okay?" I saw a clip going viral. They're saying the flight attendant slapped the passenger. Is it true? Call me. She sighed. The virtual world always moved faster than reality. Soon, friends, family, and former passengers would see the video offering their judgment based on a few seconds of edited footage without knowing what really happened. She had always been someone who kept her private life separate from her work, but that boundary had now dissolved. Evelyn stood up, took a deep breath. She didn't know what the future held, but if she had to pay the price for protecting a child who had been wronged, she was ready. In another room, Richard Langston paced back and forth, occasionally glancing into the window to check if the red mark on his cheek had faded. His lawyer, Richard Hoffman, was reviewing the notes while the police stood outside discussing. "This is ridiculous," Richard muttered. "I'm the victim, but now I'm being treated like a criminal while that woman is out there scot-free." "Calm down, Mr. Langston," Hoffman interrupted. "Your tense attitude right now won't help. They are investigating both sides. The incident of her slapping you and your behavior toward the child, behavior." Richard frowned. "The kid practically climbed over me, touched my things. I was just stopping him. The witnesses say otherwise." Sir Hoffman replied calmly. "Some have stated that you pushed the boy so forcefully he lost his balance. They're blowing this out of proportion." Richard snapped. Richard Langston still couldn't contain his frustration as he sat in the interrogation room. Where was the child's father when all this happened? He complained, busy making business calls, leaving his child to freely disturb others. His lawyer, Richard Hoffman, sighed softly and placed the file down on the table. "I need to be honest with you, Walter. The way this story is unfolding, it's not looking good for you. You're a white executive, over 60, accused of shoving a 4-year-old black child." Richard's face flushed red. "This has nothing to do with race. It's simply about behaving properly in first class. I paid for a quiet space to work, not to babysit anyone else's child." Hoffman remained calm. "I understand, but society doesn't see things that way anymore. We need to consider the broader context." Richard furrowed his brow as Hoffman continued. "The child's father is Derek Hayes, CEO of Hayes Technologies, a name that holds significant influence both in the media and financially. A familiar name slowly began to form in Richard's mind. That tech consulting company, is it him? Yes. The company is valued at over $2 billion, and he has significant backing in the media. Richard slumped back in his chair, feeling something inside him collapse. This could affect my position at Langston Financial. Not just could, this will. Hoffman nodded. The board will not stand idly by if your reputation is severely damaged. So what do you suggest? Lower your voice. Drop the lawsuit. Find a way to settle privately with the Hayes family before they escalate things further. Before Richard could respond, Sergeant Karen Williams entered the room holding a tablet. "Mr. Langston, we've just received additional video footage from other passengers. I think you should watch it before deciding whether to proceed with your complaint." She placed the tablet on the table and pressed play. The footage compiled from various angles showed the entire sequence of events. Richard's sarcastic remarks toward Micah and his father, the clear shove that made Micah stumble, and finally Evelyn Carter's emotional protective response. Most concerning were the audio recordings where Richard made racially charged comments about needing diversity and implying that the Hayes family didn't deserve to be in first class. When the video finished, Richard avoided looking Sergeant Williams in the eye. "With this new evidence," she said seriously, "the prosecutor's office may consider prosecuting you for child abuse. These videos have already gone viral, though they're not as widely shared as the clip of Ms. Carter slapping you. After she left, Richard slumped back in his chair, no longer maintaining his usual arrogance. "This is a disaster." Hoffman neatly gathered his documents. "I suggest withdrawing the complaint immediately and finding a discreet way to handle this. The longer this drags on, the bigger the damage to you and the company." Richard nodded slowly, no longer offering any resistance. He had boarded the plane as a respected businessman, and now he stood on the brink of being cast out by society because of an action he had once considered a reasonable response to an inconvenience. But the world didn't see it that way. The world saw a privileged white man insulting a black child and being stopped by a woman acting on her conscience. Withdraw the complaint. End this before it devours everything I've built. After his lawyer left, Richard remained sitting, opening his phone, despite knowing he shouldn't. Searching for news, he saw the headline that made his face turn pale. "Passenger shoves child flight attendant steps in to protect man heavily criticized." The comments below called him everything from arrogant to racist. His career reputation and public image, everything was crumbling. 4 hours later, the passengers of Transcon Flight 457 began boarding the plane again with a new crew to continue their journey to New York. The delayed flight had caused many to miss appointments, canceled connections, and rescheduled meetings. But the event had become a legend that they would share for years to come. Derek Hayes stood in line with Micah, determined to continue the father-son trip they had meticulously planned. His PR team had advised him to return to San Francisco to handle the crisis. But Derek refused. He didn't want this incident to steal away the precious time with his son, the moments he had let slip away far too many times before a young man in a Transcon Airlines management uniform approached. "I'm Jason Kelly, the Customer Service Director. On behalf of the airline, I want to offer my sincere apologies for what you and your son went through today. We've upgraded you both to the premium suite for the remainder of the journey." Derek Hayes gave a slight nod, but there was no satisfaction in him. "Thank you, but that's not necessary. What I care about more is Ms. Carter. Has the company made any statements about her?" Jason hesitated. "I'm afraid I can't comment on personnel matters, but I can assure you that the situation is being investigated seriously." "I understand," Derek replied coldly. "I just hope you consider the full context. Ms. Carter stood up to protect my son when no one else did." Before Jason could say more, a small hand tugged on Derek's sleeve. "Dad, look. It's Ms. Evelyn," across the waiting area. Evelyn Carter sat quietly. No longer in her familiar uniform, she now wore casual clothes. Her face showed signs of fatigue, but she still carried herself with the same polished demeanor. A small suitcase lay beside her, containing the uniform she might never wear again. "Excuse me," Derek said to Jason, then took Micah's hand and walked toward Evelyn. When she saw them, she slightly lifted her head, her expression a mixture of surprise and caution. "Ms. Carter," Derek said, "I want to thank you directly. What you did today, I'll never forget it." Evelyn stood up, her professional demeanor still ingrained in every movement. "I should be the one apologizing. Mr. Hayes, my actions disrupted the flight. Even though I was provoked, it was wrong to behave like that." "No," Derek replied. "You acted when I wasn't there to protect my son. That's something to be grateful for, not something to apologize for." Micah stepped forward, looking up at her with admiration. "Thank you for helping me when that man was mean to me." Evelyn bent down slightly, her expression softening. "I'm glad you're okay. I'm sorry for making things tense." Micah looked at her carefully. "Did you get in trouble?" Evelyn glanced at Derek before answering gently, but without avoiding the truth. "I made a serious mistake, even though it was with good intentions. Grown-ups have to be responsible for their actions. Understand." Derek admired the way she spoke to Micah, not hiding anything, not avoiding the tough questions, Just a kindness and honesty that he respected. "Ms. Carter," Derek said, "I've decided not to press charges against Mr. Langston. I heard that he's also withdrawn his complaint against you." A brief sense of relief passed across Evelyn's face. That helps somewhat, but the company still has its own procedures. "I know." Derek nodded. "And that's why I want to contact your company's leadership directly. What you did today was necessary, and it deserves to be acknowledged." Evelyn was stunned, partly because of the surprise, partly because of the emotion. "Mr. Hayes, that's kind of you but unnecessary. I made a choice, and I accept the consequences. Just like I chose to leave my seat to make a business call. Everyone is responsible for their decisions. What matters is what we learn from it." An announcement cut through the conversation. Transcon Flight 457 to New York LaGuardia is now boarding at Gate D42. "That's your flight," Evelyn reminded him. Derek hesitated for a second, then pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. "Please keep this. Whatever happens with the airline, I still want to stay in touch, and the offer to speak out for you still stands." Evelyn took the card, her eyes briefly touching the name printed on it. Derek Hayes, CEO, Hayes Technologies. She nodded and tucked it into her wallet. "Thank you. I wish you and your son a pleasant trip." Michael waved one last time. Evelyn smiled and waved back. They parted ways like people who had weathered a storm together, knowing that their connection wouldn't end at Denver Airport. Evelyn Carter stood in front of the towering glass headquarters of Hayes Technologies in downtown San Francisco. She gently smoothed down her blazer, hiding the worry in her eyes. No longer in her familiar uniform, perhaps never again, but she still carried the neatness of someone who had served without error for 34 years. Since the incident in Denver, her life had been caught in an unexpected whirlwind. Transcon Airlines had officially placed her on administrative leave, a soft term for suspension. The story had become noisy on social media, with various interpretations. But what surprised her the most was how the majority of public opinion sided with her. The hashtag, #ToStandWithEvelyn, had even trended, with thousands praising her courageous actions. Still, she knew company policy wasn't easily swayed, and her 3-decade career hung in the balance. Then yesterday, Derek Hayes called. He said he wanted to meet, that he had an offer for her, Ms. Carter. A receptionist spoke up. "Mr. Hayes is ready. Please follow me." The elevator took them to the highest floor. The doors opened to reveal a panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay, brilliant, serene, a stark contrast to the storm she had just endured. Derek Hayes' office was a perfect reflection of his success. Elegant, modern, and unpretentious, African art paintings were interspersed with family photos, many of them featuring Micah. Derek didn't sit behind a large power-style desk. Instead, he invited Evelyn Carter to sit in the cozy, leather-upholstered guest area with soft lighting. "Thank you for coming. Should I call you? Ms. Carter or Evelyn?" "Just call me Evelyn," she replied, slightly surprised by his respectful approach. No grandeur, no putting himself above others, something she rarely saw in executives. "I wanted to give you an update on," Micah Derek began. "He's still doing fine. The New York trip turned into a very special memory. The Air and Space Museum was definitely the highlight." Evelyn smiled gently, feeling relieved. "I'm glad to hear that Micah is a very special boy. He still asks about you." Derek continued. "He asked if you're still in trouble. I told him, sometimes adults have to face difficult situations, but that you were brave enough to stand up for what was right, even knowing there could be consequences." That remark made Evelyn choke up a little. After weeks of silence, that recognition felt like a small flame warming her heart. "Thank you. Hearing that really means a lot to me." Derek nodded, then shifted to a more serious tone. I've had several conversations with the Transcon board. They're in a difficult position. The airline's policy is very clear about not touching passengers. But your situation is an exception. Evelyn sighed, almost anticipating. This policy is policy. I've accepted that 34 years of work is a long enough journey to be proud of. Derek leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. For that reason, I invited you here today. Hayes Technologies is expanding its executive travel services. We need a head of customer experience, someone who understands what luxury service is, and I thought of you. Evelyn blinked, as if not believing her ears. I don't quite understand. Do you mean a job? Exactly, Derek smiled. I want to offer you the position of Director of Customer Experience for our corporate aviation division. Higher salary than your previous position. Full benefits and a flexible schedule so you can spend time with your grandson. For a moment, Evelyn was speechless. In all the possible futures she had imagined after the incident, this wasn't one of them. Mr. Hayes, I'm truly grateful, but may I ask, is this out of pity? Derek shook his head without hesitation. No, this is business, and a wise decision. Your reputation with VIP customers at Transcon was among the best. My team has checked. Your customer satisfaction stats have always been top-notch. I'm not making this offer out of goodwill. I'm making it because I know you're good. Evelyn looked at him intently. There was no insincerity in his words. And Mr. Langston, has everything been settled? Derek's face briefly darkened. He issued a public apology. I suspect it was more due to pressure from the board than voluntary. His company also donated a large sum to an aviation scholarship fund for underprivileged children. It may just be a PR move, but at least it brings some good. And you? Has your company been affected? Derek chuckled softly. Surprisingly, the stock actually went up. It seems that the image of a CEO leaving a meeting to be with his son and speaking up against injustice resonated with the public. They both laughed the first time in weeks. A moment later, Evelyn softly said, I need some time to think. Your offer is significant and unexpected. I completely understand. Derek nodded. Take your time. Whatever you decide. I want you to know your actions that day showed me qualities that very few people possess, and I want someone like that on my team. As Evelyn left the Hayes Technologies headquarters, the late autumn sunlight bathed the streets of San Francisco in a golden glow. What had happened on that flight, what seemed like the end of a 34-year career, had turned into a turning point that opened a new path. Life. Much like an airline journey rarely goes according to plan. Sometimes it requires an emergency landing. Sometimes it gets off course. But sometimes those diverted flights lead us to destinations far more wonderful than we ever imagined. After taking the phone out of her coat pocket, Evelyn Carter called her daughter Sarah. I just finished a meeting. It was more interesting than I expected. Are you and Miles free tonight? I'd like to have dinner with you both and share something important with you. 3 months later, on a snowy February evening, Derek Hayes and his son Micah were sitting in the first-class cabin of another flight. They were on their way back after a business trip to Chicago. Now 5 years old, Micah was still immersed in the world of aviation, eagerly wearing the pilot's badge the captain had just given him when they boarded Dad. When is Ms. Evelyn's plane going to take off? Micah asked, eyes glued to the window, watching the snow gently fall on the runway. She's about to take off, too. Derek checked his watch. Ms. Evelyn just finished a training session for the team at the new London office. Much had changed in the past few months. Transcon Airlines, instead of firing Evelyn as many had feared, had offered her an early retirement with full benefits, a compromise that reflected both the company's principles and an understanding of the special circumstances That day, Evelyn agreed to peacefully close one chapter of her life and opened a completely new one when she joined Hayes Technologies as the Director of Customer Experience in the Corporate Aviation Division. With her experience and dedication, Evelyn quickly made a difference. She redesigned the VIP service processes, trained a dedicated crew for business-class flights, and attracted more major clients. Her new colleagues both respected and adored her, just like the brightest days she had had in the airline industry. As for Langston, after the incident, he stepped down from his role as CEO at Langston Financial and took a position as an advisor. Some believed it was a result of self-reflection, while others thought it was just a move to minimize the damage. Either way, Derek still hoped that even the most stubborn perspectives could change if people dared to face the consequences of their actions. As for Derek Hayes, the incident had led to profound changes in his life. He restructured the company to reduce travel, establishing clear boundaries between work and family. Now, instead of just seeing Micah every other weekend, he spent 3 days a week with his son. A flight attendant approached with a professional smile. "Mr. Hayes, would you and your son like a drink before takeoff? I'll have a bottle of water. The kid will have apple juice." Derek smiled. Micah looked up from the airline magazine in his hand. "Dad, do you remember when you said sometimes bad things lead to good things?" I remember. Derek nodded, unsure of what Micah was about to say. "I think the day I was pushed was a bad thing. But because of that, I got to meet Ms. Evelyn. So there's something good in that, right?" Derek paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "My son, that's a very profound thought. Sometimes the things we least expect lead us to great people. But that doesn't mean bad actions are acceptable. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand." Micah nodded seriously. "But I'm still happy to have met Ms. Evelyn. Grandma says everything happens for a reason." Derek smiled. "Your grandma is indeed a wise person." He knew that he didn't blindly believe in the plan of fate. But it was hard to deny from a chaotic moment a friendship, respect, and a genuine connection had blossomed. Now Evelyn was not only a trusted employee, she had also become a close friend, often joining them for dinner, and had become a special part of their lives. As the plane taxied down the runway, the city lights reflected on the thick blanket of snow, and Derek gazed out the window, reflecting on the journey. A slap a child protected a spontaneous decision. Everything had opened up a new path for many lives. That incident had exposed prejudice, impatience, and injustice. But it also proved that courage, kindness, and the ability to change are real. Dad Micah called, snapping Derek out of his thoughts. "Do you think I could become a pilot?" Derek tightened his seatbelt, eyes full of hope. "I think you can be anything you want. The sky is the only limit." The airplane soared through the snowstorm, leaving the city lights fading behind life. Like a flight doesn't always go according to plan, but often the most memorable journeys start from the very moments we veer off course. Perhaps you've taken a flight before and thought of it simply as a means to get from one place to another. But sometimes right in the middle of the sky, tens of thousands of feet above the ground, is where the most unimaginable stories unfold, and the lives of complete strangers are forever intertwined. Today's story is not just about a slap or a child being scolded. It's about the courage to stand up against injustice, the love of a father for his child, and the compassion that transcends the rigid framework of a dedicated flight attendant's duties. We've seen Derek, a successful father, choose to step back from work to prioritize time with his son. We've met Evelyn, who didn't hesitate to risk her 30-year career just to protect an unknown child. And we've witnessed Micah, a young boy with a passion for flight, being the catalyst for adults to remember what truly matters: humanity, kindness, and compassion. No one expected a chaotic moment on a plane to become a turning point that changed many lives. But sometimes it's those detours that lead us exactly where we need to be. Not a destination on a map, but a journey of personal growth in each of us. If you're watching this and feel moved, leave us a comment. What do you think of Evelyn's actions? What would you do if you were in her shoes, or Derek's? Share your thoughts. Because who knows, your small comment could inspire someone else on a tiring day. And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be shared, don't forget to like this video. Share so more people can feel this, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next moving story. We're here every week to share small yet impactful moments of life. Stories that may never make the news or hit the spotlight, but touch the deepest corners of our hearts. See you in the next video. And remember, life, just like a flight, doesn't always go smoothly. But when we have faith, humanity, and a kind heart, even if we veer off course, we can still land exactly where we need to. Thank you for listening.